Hey everybody, I'm Zac.
And I'm Jesse.
And you're watching In Depth.
On Now You Know.
Whatever you drive, Jesse, is what you understand.
It's so true, and it's something that we've learned over quite a period of time. Now, I think that there's a bit of a preamble to this, which is that, for the most part, everyone grew up driving internal combustion engine cars. So
that's what they understand.
Basically, everyone's experience has been, you buy a car, you go to the gas station, you get an oil change, it dies, you buy another one, you spend lots of money repairing it. That we're all sort of used to that.
We've gone through kind of a unique experience where we started with the BMW i3. That was our first electric car that we knew about, and we kind of learned everything to do with EVs from that perspective. And what would you say is the number one takeaway you got from driving the i3?
I think that I learned what range anxiety was. I think that was the first, true experience, because we were interested in EVs before that. We had seen all sorts of different concepts of EVs in the past, the Roadster and,
the original Roadster.
The original Roadster. We had known about the Leaf, but we had not actually gotten to sit and drive in an electric car until the i3.
Right. And I mean, it was cool. It was full of technology, and it was a whole new way of doing things, and it was quiet, and it was clean.
And I loved lots of different aspects
exactly.
of it.
But the everyday driving aspect of it was, to me, a little bit scary because of that whole range anxiety. If you were driving around town, that was one thing. But as soon as we had to go from like the suburbs to the city and back, it was like...
Once you took that thing on the highway...
Yeah. I think the other thing we took away from that car was that 90% of charging takes place at home.
Right.
We're lucky enough to have, a garage and a driveway, so we could charge it at home. And basically, we started every morning with a full battery. So we could, go about our day with that full battery, and we're like, this is great, except that the battery isn't that big, so you don't have that much range.
Right.
In an i3, to remind everyone, I don't know, we're talking probably about 60 miles on
60 to 70 miles on a good day.
And it depended on weather and stuff like that. And the other part of that was, there were chargers, but to use them was a very complicated and dangerous thing in the sense that, not that you're going to get hurt, but that you could show up at a charger and it could be full, it could be under repair, it could be closed. And so, and that was probably the only one that you could make it to. And so you may not be able to make it home.
Right. And I mean, we did have the range extender, which sort of gave you that that just sense of like, if everything goes wrong, I still have 50 miles of backup range.
All right. So then in March of 2016, we got Sparky, our Model X, and we immediately... I remember from like the first couple of weeks being like, you know what? Let's just do a road trip, and let's do a crazy road trip. Let's go from Boston, Massachusetts to San Francisco, California, and back. And so that summer, that's what we did.
Right, because we couldn't stop driving. From the moment we got it, we were like, wow, after the i3, we have so much range.
Yeah, in fact,
let's go for a drive. And then...
I think we drove to Cape Cod one night, like a month after we got the car.
Exactly.
And that was crazy if you think
unplanned.
about it.
We weren't like, let's go to Cape Cod. Yeah. We were like, let's just drive it. And then we were just like, let's go to Cape Cod.
And we went to the tip of Cape Cod. We went to Provincetown.
And then we were able to drive home using the supercharger network. And I think that little trip was what led to planning of the cross-country road trip, because we were like, if we did this and it was just super fun and we were just excited and happy to do it the whole time, let's do a whole cross-country road trip.
And that's pretty much what launched this channel. We vlogged every day from our road trip and sent the footage back to Brent and Bobby, who edited it, put it up on our channel. And so we went through 25 states, 75 superchargers, 2 provinces of Canada in 16 days, and showed that it was completely doable. And in fact, during that trip, because it's a Model X, we didn't pay for supercharging, and we saved about $800 in what would have been gas.
And we had no problems. There was, at no point did we show up to a supercharger and it was broken or, wouldn't charge, or the car stopped working. And to me, that was an experience that was just like, wow, you can just totally do that. I mean, I had gone for some trips in, longer car rides before, and, you have to, like, before you go, everyone starts saying all these things. You have to take care of your car, and it's like, you didn't tell me to do this when I was driving to work.
Right.
And it's like, it's different, because your car is going to get hotter. You have to make sure you check all your fluids and do all this stuff. We didn't have to worry about it.
And remember, this was in the height of summer. I mean, in August, we're in Utah. The temperatures were super high, and we're testing everything out. We're seeing, like, can the AC keep up with that big glass front windshield?
Right.
Like, everything worked fine. And then when we got home, we immediately began going, hey, you know what? In fact, one day, I think we're looking at the supercharger map, and we saw that there was a supercharger in Key West.
The middle of the ocean.
Right.
It just looked like in the middle of the ocean off the coast of Florida.
So, like, we zoomed in, and we're like, oh, that's on Key West, Florida.
It's on a teeny, tiny little island off the coast of Florida, which you can drive to. And we're like, perfect.
So we did a road trip to Key West, Florida. Again, no problems whatsoever.
Right.
So we kind of feel like that we're a little bit of experts at this point with Tesla supercharging, because we've done so much of it. It's not just like our local supercharger. We've done it all over the country. And I think this opened our eyes to what the supercharger network is. It frankly made everything else seem like a joke.
Right.
The speed of charge is incredible at a supercharger. The number of stalls is always at least 4, but usually 6 or 8 or 12.
Or 50.
Right, exactly. The locations are usually well picked for getting along, a long distance trip. They're super easy to use. You just get out of the car, plug in. There's no cards, there's no apps, there's no nothing.
Right.
So in terms of the cost, it's always less than gas. We experience 3 or 4 times cheaper than gas.
And it's usually much cheaper than like most other charging services. I mean, you might find a charge point that's free, but it's going to be 6.6 kilowatts, not 125.
Reliability. Every single one we encountered was working, and since then has been working. And there's usually great amenities. Not every single supercharger, but most have great amenities like restaurants and so forth around them. So then while you were waiting for your Model 3 a couple of years ago, you bought a Nissan Leaf.
Right. And so I got to experience the joys and tribulations of the CHAdeMO network, which is a 50 kilowatt charging station network. So,
and that's because your Leaf, unlike some Leaves, has the ability to quick charge.
Right. So I actually have the CHAdeMO port, and I'm able to use it, charge up the car very quickly at a 50 kilowatt station. And it was really nice in one sense, because I was in a much more limited range vehicle than, say, a Tesla, because it was about 90 miles of range. And so if I wanted to sort of go outside of my little bubble of the world, just, the around town and the commuting, I would need one of these stations. And luckily enough, we live in an area where there are some stations. And I learned, it was very nice to be able to charge, but it was also very scary, because each of these locations have 1 or 2 plugs. And so if you show up and someone's using it or it's broken, you are in big trouble, because now you're going to have to go find a level 2 charger to charge up very slowly in order to get home. So it was a little scary. Every time you were going out, it was kind of like the Wild West. You're like, this is an adventure, and I might not make it back.
And I want to point out that you're a very adventurous EV owner.
Right.
You were willing to go search out new chargers. You kind of enjoyed that.
And I knew that I had to make it work. When I went into the Leaf, I said, okay, I first and foremost want an EV more than anything else. I wanted it more than I wanted to save money, because I spent more than I wanted to on a car that basically just had to get me to work, school, and home and back. I sort of went into it knowing, like, I know that it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to face it as a challenge because I want an EV more than anything else.
And that is quite different than I think most normal car buyers are. Most people want to get into a car and know that there won't be any problems that day.
Exactly. Like, I knew that if I arrived at a place and the charger wasn't working, that I was going to be late. I was going to be epically late for whatever it was, whether it was going to bed, going to school, or going to work. I was going to be late. So I triple checked everything. I made sure I had large margins when I was, planning trips. I'd make sure that I would have 25% when I got to the next charger, just in case something went wrong and I had to find another solution. And I usually had backup plans. I would plan these huge things, and it was just like to go to Boston and to come back, which is, for where I live, it's like a 30-mile.
Right.
It's only 30 miles away.
And there's many things that you had to do, like you bought a heated electrical blanket that you could plug into your 12-volt socket so that you could heat your body but keep the heat off in the car to save battery.
Right.
That's not what the normal EV driver is going to do, or the normal any driver.
A normal consumer is not going to do that.
Right.
I went into it full of excitement and knowing full well all of the limitations. And so I think that sort of showed me, this car, which MSRP's for like $32,000, really is worth what I paid it for the used price, which was like, 10 grand. It wasn't worth it. Like, if I wasn't so excited about it, I would have hated it.
Right.
And I would have sold it almost immediately as soon as I realized, just what 90 miles of range would get me. And especially in the winter when it's not 90 miles.
Right. The other thing is that you learned that your car had quick charge, which was a 50 kilowatt charge. And you had to understand where you could go to get that. You had to go to CHAdeMO chargers, which, again, if you're watching this and you're not fully into electric cars yet,
right,
these are lots of weird terms like J1772 charger, level 2, CHAdeMO, quick charge. You had to learn all that stuff and learn where those particular chargers are, because I think a lot of times people will go onto an app and they'll be like, oh, there's just a whole bunch of chargers.
Right.
And they're all different. Some of them your car can't use at all. Some of them your car can use, but it'll be super slow. So like, and some of them are at the back of a Nissan dealership, which may not be open.
Right. And you'd have to hope that it's working, and that you have to hope that the guy knows what you're talking about when you pull in and you want to charge, because they just want to sell you an Altima. I had the experience of walking into the dealership saying, hi, I need to use the CHAdeMO port, and then being like, oh, well, we've got I don't know what a CHAdeMO is, but we certainly have a cool Altima which we can get you in. And it's like, it was good to know that Nissan put together a network using their dealers, but it was poorly implemented. It was a super big pain. I think that was an important takeaway for me, especially when I already knew what the supercharger network could be. Right. It was like, wow.
So, I mean, we're a clearinghouse for kind of all levels, non-EV drivers, so ICE drivers, but then people who drive Leafs and i3s and then Bolts, and even conversions. I mean, people who have converted their ICE cars to EVs, all the way to Teslas. And not only that, but we're basically clearinghouse for people all around the world. We hear from people in Europe and Australia and even China. So that makes us, I think, kind of unique. And that's what we're trying to bring to the channel, is this. We kind of hear all the questions, and we kind of hear all of the interests that people have. And what we're trying to do here on the show is bring them and share them back with you. So we know how complicated it is to adequately explain how charging works, because it's so dependent on a bunch of things. It's dependent on your location and your region, what kind of car you drive, your personality, your housing situation, like whether you live in an apartment or a house with a garage, whether you live in a city where there's no way to get charging, where you live. It depends on what your commute is like. It depends on what the temperature is where you live, whether you live in Norway or Florida. And it depends on the kinds of travel you'd like to do in the car. For instance, do you just commute in a city, a very short urban commute, or you sometimes want to be able to drive, out of state?
Right. We talk to a lot of people who, want to get into an EV, but they live in the middle of Montana, and if they want to go to the grocery store, it's 50 miles away. Okay, and I also need to be able to charge, and there's no charging stations in the middle of Montana. So that's a huge issue. They're like, for most people, I'm like, hey, if you want, you can buy a used Leaf. It's nice and cheap. But then when someone from Montana comes in and is like, hey, should I buy a used Leaf? I am like, where do you live roughly?
Right.
Oh, you live there? You can't get a Leaf.
And if you just change one thing in this formula, right? So we've got all these different factors. You just change one of them, like let's say personality. A car that could work for one person, same commute, same location, all that stuff, but has a slightly different personality, won't work for them anymore.
Right.
So that makes it really complicated when we're trying to tell you guys about stuff. We've learned this because we've gone to tons of EV events where we meet people in person and we really get to know them. And we've done so much talking to you guys here, right here on the internet.
Right. And I think that the takeaway here is that almost no one understands the experience of another EV driver. So when we go to EV events, the Leaf drivers kind of huddle into their little corner, and the Tesla drivers are plentiful. They're all over here because they were all able to make it. Sorry, I drove a Leaf for a long time. I'm just saying, a lot of EV events, I was like, yeah, I can't go to that. My Leaf won't make it. The experience between the two is completely different, and until you can actually fully experience it, you have no idea what anyone else is talking about. So to me, a Bolt owner has a completely different experience than a Leaf owner.
And the funny thing here is you might be saying, well, wait a minute. from the outside, a Bolt has about the same range as a Model 3. So why can't they be considered the same?
Right.
And there's so many reasons why they're not the same.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're talking about. There's so much minutia there and so many factors that you can't just take range as one of the things that unites everybody.
So one of the things that can really demonstrate to people who have never experienced an EV before is actually getting hands-on experience in an EV. So getting your butt in the seat, sitting down, being in an EV, experiencing the acceleration and stuff like that. And this is where Teslas really shine, because you have the acceleration, you have the very beautiful front screen, there's autopilot, there's all sorts of amazing features that are not in any other car. And so once you sit down and you start to experience these things, your mind starts to get blown a little bit. It really excites people. But one thing that is kind of harder when if you have someone sitting in the car with you is to sort of explain how the supercharger network works. Because a lot of people have cars, and a lot of people just do commuting for most of the year. For like 98% of the time, they are just driving to work and driving home and to the grocery store, that kind of thing, which I classify as commuting. And then every once in a while, they go, oh, let's go to grandma's house, where they need to go outside of their usual bubble and travel somewhere else. And that can be anywhere from the nearest city to the other side of the country. And they might decide to fly, but oftentimes they'll decide to drive because it's within some reasonable amount of driving for them personally. And that's where the supercharger network shines, but it is one of the most difficult things to explain to people, to show people, because you can't really be like, okay, you've come to an EV event. Let's go on a multi-day trip.
Right.
People will be like, I have to get back to my dog and my kids.
And this is exactly what I did with my father. Last summer, we went on a 6-day multi-state road trip. And, he's my dad. He went to MIT, smart guy. You'd think that he would completely understand EVs. But I have to tell you, he didn't understand them pretty much at all. Mm-hmm. And that's because he hadn't had butts in seats until then, and this extended butts in seats that you're talking about. So it took him about 3 days before he fully understood supercharging and autopilot. Mm-hmm. And then it took the rest of the trip for him to love it even more. Mm. And that's the thing. I kind of think that Tesla needs to reevaluate how they get the word out. Yes, I think the best way is to see your friend with the car, because then you can talk to them over lunch and you can go for rides with them and maybe even go for a road trip with them. I really think that Tesla should give people the car for 24 hours.
I think it should honestly be longer than that. I think that they should actually organize a curated road trip for you.
Ooh.
So what you do is it's part of the sales experience. So maybe you pay a small amount up front, something like, I don't know, like $100. You get to experience the car for, say, 3 days,
okay. Right?
They say you're going to be driving from here to here and then there to there, and then you're going to be skiing here, and you're going to be tobogganing, or you're going to go to
this is a fun trip,
to a whitewater rafting, something like that. And yeah, this is actually going to be like a little trip for you to fully experience the car, including supercharging. So you're actually going to head to a supercharger, you're going to plug it in, you're going to experience how fast it charges, and that, I think, would be a much better way to have someone fully understand how the car is going to function. Because when you're sitting in a showroom with a showroom employee, they can sit in the car next to you and say, and it has 250 miles of range, and you can go, oh wow, that's a lot. And then what? And then they can point to a map and say, this is the supercharger network. And you can go, okay, what's that? And then they can, there's many, many different levels and steps to explain. And then you still don't fully understand it.
Right. It's kind of like if we went back to when automobiles took over from horses, right? And we're trying to get you to get into an automobile, and you just arrived at the dealership in your horse.
Right.
To get you to fully understand it, again, you would need a few days to fully get this concept. Because if I say to you, oh, no, you don't have to bed your horse at night, and you don't have to feed him for 6 hours and let him rest.
And there's no horseshoes anymore.
Right.
You do tires. And I'd be like, tires. Okay, so it's like horseshoes. No. It's what touches the ground, but it's different.
Wait, so gasoline? It's
So
like
I go to my blacksmith and I ask for tires. No. You go somewhere else. Like there's a lot of
Right.
learning that needs to take place.
And it's very easy if you get confused to think that it's more complicated, right? You might think, oh well, tires, that sounds way more complicated than horseshoes, because I understand horseshoes.
Right.
I got a guy who does horseshoes. I don't know where I go for tires.
Right.
So, and that's what we're trying to say here. It's such a shift. It's such a disruption that the early adopters, the ones who've already been getting these cars, are probably have the mindset to kind of get it, and like you were with the Leaf, to try and want to make it work.
Right.
But the average person doesn't want to try and make it work.
No.
The average person just wants to get in the car and have a normal experience.
And so this is where I point to Tesla more often than not. When people are messaging us and they say, I want to get into an EV, here is my list of constraints. I live in an apartment. I need to do long trips sometimes. I live somewhere where there aren't that many chargers. What do I pick? Tesla. Right? There's the whole supercharging network basically has you covered. If you live in a city like New York, there's many different supercharging stations where you can actually park and charge your car up for the week, because if you're just driving around the city, that'll be fine. If you need to go on long trips, maybe before I was thinking, oh, Leaf, you could probably pull off a Leaf in New York City. Now I'm thinking if you need to go on a long trip, it's going to have to be Tesla. That is kind of the crux of it, is that the supercharger network, as well as the battery size, means that Tesla is pretty much the only option. I don't think it's going to necessarily stay that way forever, but at the moment, it is truly the only thing. And I want to call out to everyone who drives a Tesla who's watching this. I want to urge you to get those butts and seats, get people in your car and have them experience as much as they possibly can. So, I mean, this means, take your friend for a road trip.
Yep.
Plan a road trip with your friend. Go a couple supercharging stations away, go a couple of states, go across the country. Do something out of your comfort zone. Take a friend. Take someone who has no experience with the car, doesn't fully grasp it. I think that first of all, you're going to have a lot of fun if you do pretty good planning. And secondly, both of you are going to fully understand the power of the supercharger network. Take your coworkers on spins around the block. Obviously, you can't say, all right, team, let's go for a road trip to Yellowstone. But you can certainly take them for a zip around the block, show them that acceleration, show them autopilot if you have it. It really changes people's perspectives. I think that is the point. The whole idea here is to educate, to change people's minds. Right now, you're the only kinds of people with these cars. It's your duty to show them what the world could look like and to excite their imaginations about the future. And let's just try and keep in mind why we are doing all of this. It's for the betterment of all mankind here. It's because we can't keep driving in internal combustion engine cars. It's basically proven at this point. Climate change is going to radically change our environment. We can't be driving around in internal combustion engine cars. There is no Band-Aid cure that we've come up with yet to just suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and keep it there. And also pollution. ICE engines are huge in pollution and PM 2.5 particles. Around the world, cities are having to close schools and ban cars on certain days because of the pollution. It's so bad. This is the future. This is what everyone's going to have to get used to at some point. You may as well start showing them now. So anyway, I just want to really, really show people your car.
And what's interesting is that we show a lot of people the cars, and the people who get it the most are the kids. In fact, they all get it. I haven't met a kid yet who has not immediately gotten it. Mm-hmm. And the reason they've got it is because they don't have to unlearn anything. They haven't learned how to drive an ICE car yet. They haven't had to fill it up with gas, any of that. So when they see the electric car, they're like, of course this makes sense.
Right. I know how my tablet works because I'm a kid and I have a tablet or iPhone, or I know how, they have battery electronics. They get it completely. And, having a car that's essentially a battery on wheels, totally understood in their minds.
Now, as I mentioned before, we did a lot of road trip videos. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a friend who's on the fence, or if you yourself want to learn about how easy it is to charge on a road trip, I urge you to go watch some of our videos. They're in a playlist so you can check them out and see how we popped around the whole country very easily.
And I mean, keep in mind that these were shot in the past, as are all of our videos, actually. So there weren't as many superchargers in the world.
But you know about some videos that are in the future?
Well, what are those?
Our Roadster videos are coming up in the future. So we're going to be taking the Tesla next generation Roadster, driving it all over this country, the US and Europe, and showing it off along with the Tesla semi-truck. And the whole reason for those trips is because we want to get people in the car. We want them to experience firsthand that these cars and these trucks blow away everything else.
Right. And that they're the future. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. That will make sure that if the future comes, which it has for billions of years, that you can actually watch those videos. So that's exciting. Also, please be sure to give this video a like. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope that you enjoy all of our content on this channel. Just to remind everyone, we have Tesla Time News every Monday. We have In-Depth every Tuesday. We've got Model 3 Tip of the Week that comes out on Wednesday. We also have the Patreon bonus stories, which are on our Patreon page, and those are for people who support us for $1 or more a month. We also have lots of other Patreon perks. You can check them out on Patreon, including Discord, which is a wonderful way for our entire community to communicate with each other. It's one of the nicest corners on the internet, I must say.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody.
Now you know.